Good morning, Jamie. How are you doing this morning?
Very well, thank you. So quick intros. I'm Jamie Clarke, Managing Director and Co-Founder of Regal Cloud. We are a talent partner in the cloud space, bridging the gap between outcome-based consulting and recruitment services. Got the pleasure of being joined by Simon Haskey today, good friend of Regal's and a long-time associate. Simon, thanks for joining me.
Hi, thank you for inviting me today, Jamie. That's great. We're very pleased to be here. So I am COO of One City Global. We specialize in Internet of Things technologies, and we have physical assets, physical products, as well as software behind that to bring off data and to analyze that data. And obviously, a lot of that data is stored in cloud. My background has been primarily in consulting over 20 years. And in that time, I've had quite a lot of experience both across traditional data center, but also other infrastructure deployments as well. As I say, I'm really pleased to be here today. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the invitation.
No worries. No, you've got quite the background in digital transformation, cloud transformation, Simon. I think you're being modest, really, with the organisations and some of the functions and practices that you've led. I mean, how would you summarise the historical context of where we've seen that move from traditional on-premise infrastructure to cloud-based models? When did you first become aware of that? And yeah, talk us through your journey there a little bit.
Sure, yeah, and I think we've been talking about cloud for almost 10 years now, and like a lot of technologies, people start talking about technology before it's actually used, I say, in anger and the idea about it. So I think within the data center environment, we started really with considering virtualization. So rather than traditionally you'd have one application or a couple of applications per server, organizations were able to consolidate somewhat in terms of virtualization. I think that was a game changer in terms of moving to cloud, because that then meant organizations could separate the physical infrastructure from the applications on top, and therefore the applications weren't necessarily didn't need to be in one physical location. I think then people's initial concerns was to look at security. So I worked with a well-known telecoms provider and looking at using cloud initially for test and development environments. That was sort of 2012, 2013. I think that's when it first started. There was one particular supplier I know that had a supposed cloud offering, and we actually found out it was actually a server sat in the States somewhere, because when the actual cloud service went down, the developers were on the phone to me, and I rang the service provider, being very careful not to mention who that is, and they said, oh yes, we'll get the guy in the States to go and get the tapes. I said, what do you mean you're going to get the tapes? So he went and got the backup tapes, came back, and then the service is up and running again. So that wasn't necessarily true cloud. That was just an example, I'd say, of virtualization. And I think, kind of what I said initially, cloud initially meant different things, different people. So that's where it started. Has been around for 10 years, and it's a lot of technologies. It's evolved. But I would say the virtualization, the ability to virtualize with a well-known product that begins with V, and as well what you use worldwide now, was the start of the game changer and the route to fully enabling applications that are totally agnostic from the underlying infrastructure.
Do you think when that conversation first started to happen, that technology was first being spoken about and introduced, how much sort of skepticism do you think there was, particularly from perhaps the C-suite, to embrace that technology, or was that adoption, was the technology so obviously good and game-changing that it was a race to adopt, or did you see in some of your enterprise customers at the time that there was a reluctance of uptake, and how do you compare that virtualization uptake to the current state of cloud computing and the adoption of that?
I think I think it would be adopted in the small SME organizations, like for us, example. Obviously, we're very fortunate now. We don't have to go and have our own data center set up. We have applications. We just expect it to work. It's there, and it's already started. I think the large organizations, they always had invested a significant amount of money in legacy and data centers. And I think, and with the corporate sector, they're always going to be slightly behind the curve because it's got to be reliable, it's got to work 100% of the time, and whatever they're used to, and they know. And it's also a question of what the support team are used to. They know how to manage it, and actually the support team can actually see it physically in the data center. So I suspect, originally the CIOs, yes, although they wanted to move forward, would have taken counsel, I guess, from the service teams. They would have been, from my experience of service teams, they're obviously very, very aware that their responsibility for a 7x7 service is down to them. So anything that potentially is going to rock the boat and cause a problem with that, they would not be keen on moving necessarily in that direction. So so I think, yes, the CIOs wanted to move in that direction. And again, I think, the steps along the path there through virtualization was the first way forward, first tentative steps down that route. And as I alluded to earlier, I think using cloud for development and test environment enables you to see what the capability is without actually necessarily putting your production services online. Production, obviously, is the service that people are using in anger and carries revenue potentially, and can severely impact the business from a financial and also from a customer perspective. So definitely very important to the last environments to move to cloud have sometimes been production.
Sure. And with the introduction of virtualization, I could be wrong about this, but I don't get the impression that significantly disrupted the structure of say technology teams or infrastructure teams. You could still have that siloed sort of operating model that we're used to seeing. Historically we've seen separate network teams, separate infrastructure team, storage team, and then it was just a virtualization team. And with cloud now, particularly public cloud, we're seeing that really disrupt that legacy operating model and that structure as well. Can you speak a little bit more about how you've seen that change and how organisations, particularly large ones, are having to embrace that change and the implications thereof?
Sure, yeah, and what you say is absolutely right. I think where we're getting to now is the next stage, which is DevOps, and people have been talking about DevOps for a long time. So this is where the operation team, the development team become one, and they're using it, using a cloud service. They're quickly moving code and develop and new applications from the development environment into a production environment, several times a day, sometimes several minutes a day, every minute a day, depending on if you've got the right process in place. And that is a very different model from the siloed, where the service team would actually just physically be responsible for keeping the servers up and running, and then it'd be down to other processes and other people to actually fully test the application, and when it's signed off, then it could be finally deployed. So DevOps is a much more of a sort of seamless process. There are definite methodologies on how to do it, and there's a whole new stack of applications that are being used to build code and enable developers to look at version control, make sure that they can quickly revert back to previous versions or overwrite that or update. So I think that DevOps is depending on the application. I mean, if you've got a very big billing system, then I think DevOps is a bit more difficult to implement. Whereas if you're running a sort of website CRM based system, then the DevOps system is much more aligned to that model, and customers won't necessarily notice or mind immediately if there are some issues with the end product. I think the other thing I was going to say is, the infrastructure team themselves will in the future become very different. They've got to go through a change cycle. So when you're looking at infrastructure now, infrastructure effectively can be coded as software. So on the cloud platforms, it's software based rather than physical hardware. So those guys that have traditionally had a lot of experience around deploying physical hardware and know about servers themselves, they log on using Unix and have a lot of time spending around the actual physical hardware and set it up correctly, will now need to go through a change that either means they become more development more development enabled, or the business upskills those people into different roles across the business. So there's I think the IT department as a whole is going through a change in itself through its own operating model. So there's opportunities there for traditional infrastructure teams that looked after data center, I would say, to move up the value chain and to become more customer focused, or to become part of the DevOps team formally, learn new skills, and give themselves a bit more longevity working through the next few years.
Absolutely, I can attest to that. We see that a lot in the job market with great talented individuals that we've known for many years in that infrastructure space that are now taking it upon themselves to, be it AWS, GCP, Azure, get that training, and so eager to apply that knowledge commercially, because they can all see that, well, this is where the market is heading. I don't want to be stuck in this sort of legacy infrastructure. I've got to upskill or retrain and look at things like, as you say, infrastructure as code, and really embrace that new way of working. And I think agile probably comes into that as well. From a project management perspective, we're seeing a lot of core infrastructure project managers with fantastic backgrounds and experience, but perhaps have worked in a waterfall way historically, now having to really embrace agile and kind of embed that change within organisations as well. So I think there's a bit of a seismic shift, across the industry at the moment.
No, absolutely, and I'd say it's an evolution of where we were. From 10 years ago, we've come a long way. People talk about DevOps for a long time, but I think, particularly given the challenge we've had in the last 6 months with the COVID-19 crisis, people become more DevOps aware and want to actually keep updating software. And it doesn't necessarily matter where they're working from or which team. Obviously, it matters. Not matters which team they're working in, but it gives more flexibility in terms of companies need more flexibility in terms of how software is updated to be agile and meet the rapidly changing needs of their end customers, while making sure they're credible and keeping the lights on 24/7.
Sure, absolutely. And then obviously on COVID-19, that's been well, we won't go into too much detail on it broadly. We could be here for a very long time, but it's been a game changer in the market, and organisations having to accelerate rapidly their digital transformation plans. And actually, I've been quite impressed with what I've seen, particularly larger organisations. I think I saw a quote from Jess Staley, the CEO of Barclays, on BBC the other day, saying it's fascinated him how they've managed to run a organisation with the complexity and scale of 60,000 on staff from their kitchen tables, and it's been, I mean, I don't know, I'm not talking about Barclays specifically, but generally it seems to have been relatively, considering the challenge of it, seamless in terms of that transition. Has that surprised you? Is that what's your kind of view on how organisations have been able to pivot so quickly to fully remote?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of points there. So I'll answer those two. I think first of all, I think it's worth acknowledging that even 3 or 4 years ago, we would have really struggled in the same situation. I think, and some parts of the country are still struggling with broadband. So from us, from an IT perspective, I think organisations have got to, going forward, to consider the end comms as well, and often the last mile into people's houses is the difficult part. And as we know, BT has still got a big BT and others have a still big agenda to roll out broadband. But I think even 3 years ago, we'd have struggled, really struggled, like we're doing now, we're talking video. That's thanks to a reasonable broadband link at the moment. I think that's only just recently come into fruition. So that's definite positive. I think people did adapt very quickly. They realised they had to under pressure. I think within the technology industry, people have been working at home for a while. Definitely myself. I've tried to get 1 or 2 days a week at home in the last couple of years working there. So I knew it was possible. I think for myself, actually working in the house full time, I do miss the office. So I think there's more personal and some mental challenges rather than actually the physical, actually the technology. But I do think that yes, companies have adapted very well. They now need to revisit some of those programs, in my view, without, if there's some that are close to completion, then let them roll through. But I think without necessarily stopping everything in its tracks, they should revisit the strategy that they originally signed up to and say, does that still work for us, given the change in working circumstance? So yes, we will see people go back to work, but there'll also be a lot more flexibility, I think. Sorry, we'll see people go back to the office, I meant more than back to work. Yeah. There will be a lot more flexibility, and people working from home versus working from the office. So I think it has been seen to work, but I think organisations will need to use their infrastructure and consider their infrastructure and both the needs of the network into people's houses, but also their overall property estate and where they see the growth in the next few years. All those have got to be combined into a strategy that can then be aligned with the technology platform they're using going forwards. I think actually, Jamie, one of the things we saw was actually not so much the back end, but the front end, the desktops, a lot more laptops and kit was deployed very quickly. I think that's where we also saw a shortfall. So it's important to have a holistic view now of the overall estate. Organizations got to where people's different working habits, when can they do updates, and what's the overall, how they're going to provide a reasonable support function to those office workers when they're at home as well. So I think you need, I was just thinking about this morning, so there's one thing of having people's desktops and issues in the office itself when there's a local support team. It's another thing when they're halfway across the country. So how do you scale up your not just your back office, your infrastructure, data center or the cloud, but also the front office, the desktops and your local support, all as one coordinated entity that supports the whole organization, and that they feel they have the flexibility, they get the same support, can work at home or in the office and have the same, be able to be as productive.
And if you were talking to a CIO today that was coming from that perhaps legacy model and wanted to move to the new world, whether that be DevOps, any aspect of digital transformation, where do you start? If you're talking to a C-level now and you having been through this many times with many organisations, what's the starting point for such a program of change?
Okay, so a couple of things there. So first of all, getting the right business case to start with is very important. So it will allude to some of the points I've talked about now need to be part of the business case. So traditionally we looked at how you could just save money, but now it's important to have the ability for flexibility. So I think that's got to be factored in to your business case. So your original business case on, okay, if I reduce my data center by half on the number of servers, that will give me X number of savings. But actually now I need to consider, okay, can that environment still support the number of users working away from home, and have you got enough capacity, etc., etc. So I think that's the first thing. And then the original approach for migrating to cloud is to look at the application stack first. So what applications are potentially not critical that could be moved to a more agile infrastructure on cloud, and you basically look at the relationships between those applications, because when you're doing a migration, you want those applications that are linked together to move at the same time. So start with that and look at the cloud providers you've got available at the moment. You need to look at, again, at the applications that are moving to cloud. So how are you going to continue to update those applications? What's the life cycle of those applications? Who's going to update them? And if that, sometimes you can also, there's a potential to skip out the transformation by moving directly to an as a service model. So most people now are moving to Office 365 rather than having Office on their own servers in their own data center. They'll move to Microsoft Cloud. Now the challenge of that is that Microsoft or others will then update your applications without you being aware of it. So the final point is it's very, one of the other points is it's very important to look at how you have customized your application stack. So if it's heavily customized and you're moving to the cloud, then do you still have control of the application, how it's managed? If you're going to as a service model, then traditionally, the best route is to follow the standard processes and potentially adapt your own operating model or processes to fall in line to a certain extent, because those applications will be updated as and when that application owner or provider sees fit. They're not going to necessarily wait for you to agree to that. So you don't want to come up and have a surprise that something's not working because some updates have been done overnight. So you need to be aware of some of those challenges and some of the key points when you're looking to move to cloud.
Excellent. And at One City Global now, you're actively engaged in solving some of these problems?
Yes, we are. Yeah, so as I say, we're also looking at Internet of Things. We have our own smart platforms. We're moving down that route, and we're actively we have some projects overseas that we're working towards to get established this year. And for us, COVID-19 has meant communications, as alluded to earlier, is really important. So everybody needs to be connected. If they didn't realise that earlier, they do have to be now. And then yes, we have some of our own platforms to pull off some of that data, and we're looking at cloud and to support that, obviously, and we're obviously using some other we're using graphing products as well, I should say, that are also based in the cloud, based on a well-known cloud that begins with A, ends in S. So that they'll also be based on that as well. But yeah, we're also helping clients with traditional migration to cloud and their overall strategy as well, which will include a comm strategy as well as a migration to cloud. So we have the opportunity to look at both the technology opportunity, but also some of the local comms issues as well. And some of our team are working with some of the organisations that are deploying the fibre optics to individuals' houses, and to the street, to the cities. So we have a full range of capability across all that.
Fantastic. Sounds exciting.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it's definitely we're having some really good conversations about helping clients reevaluate where they are now, where they want to go in the future, and as I say, we're also supporting. We have a conglomerate of organisations that we're working with, other like yourselves and other partnership organisations, that we can bring an end-to-end service to clients right way through from migration to cloud through to the service software as a service model, which people are moving to now. For example, service management, very popular move at the moment to a well-known SaaS provider, right way through to how can I look at my data and I've got some additional sensors from IoT. How do I use those? How do I manage that? And we can provide a wraparound service for that as well. So yeah, we have a full end-to-end portfolio opportunity there that I think you wouldn't necessarily get with some of the large organisations at the moment. They're very focused on particular elements, but as I've alluded to as we had a discussion today, I think it's very important that organisations now have a holistic view of their whole IT function, not just from the central perspective, but how are people going to work with it at home and how they're going to use it, right way through to, okay, how can I use some of this information that I'm gathering to better use for myself and for my clients and for me as an employer and as an organisation.
Simon, if people are interested in finding out more about One City Global, where can we point them? Where should they look?
Okay, thank you. So yes, we have our website, onecityglobal.com. Also, or else email me directly, simon.haskey@onecityglobal.com, or else speak to you directly, Jamie, as we will potentially we will work with you as a partnership with a number of clients. So yeah, feel free. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So look forward to seeing you there, posting a message on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Look forward to future collaborations.
Absolutely, yes. I think now's the time. Hopefully we've had a challenging year so far. Some number of organisations, they've got a better sight of understanding of what some of the challenges are in terms of people accessing systems, mobility, where people want to work, flexibility. Now it's time to take that information, you've got new knowledge, and use that as a benefit as an enabler for your organisation to increase your market share against your competitors. Now's the time to really invest in the technology and to get a start on your competitors.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, no doubt we will speak soon.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Look forward to the next session. Thank you. Cheers.